a completely different shape anyway.
There we go, the seafront.
Whatever it is that Isaiah, or the Isaiahs, or the team of Isaiahs intended to say, there's no doubt about it that that very clear personification of the concept of the Messianic age into the person of the Messiah, someone will be born, someone will live this life, someone will experience these things, gave permission, gave rise to the idea of an individual Messiah. By the time we get to Roman times, the Jewish world is in a ferment of expectation, and the Isaiah texts are expected to be highly indicative of what this individual will look like. By the time then we come to Jesus, it's no surprise that some group of Jews would say to themselves, this is the man.
The BBC Sporting Witness returns for 2014.
I was remembering thinking, man, this golf setting is harder than I thought.
From the Winter Olympics to the Football World Cup.
I wish he hadn't punched in the net, and I wish he hadn't scored the best goal I've ever seen.
Sporting history told by the people who were there.
You could see him like a wolf licking his chops, getting ready to devour the sport.
Sporting Witness, on air and online, Saturdays on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to the BBC World Service.
I'm Ed Butler, and if you've missed this week's assignment, join me in the casinos of Cambodia. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of Vietnamese gamblers cross the border every day to play. But who's really winning in Cambodia's casino money go round? Catch up online at bbcworldservice.com.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
At 3 o'clock GMT, I'm Julian Keane. Welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Today, an insight into what happened to the capsized South Korean ferry from the ship's captain.
I gave instructions regarding the route, and then I briefly went to the bedroom, and then the sinking happened. At the time, the current was very strong.
We'll have the latest on the tense standoff in eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian activists continue to defy the authorities. What will the government do next? Get the answer from Ukraine's foreign minister.
We do believe that with the Geneva document, we will make a progress, and the people who occupied the building, they will give them up, as well as the surrounding weapons.
Also, we're in Colombia, where 3 days of national mourning have been declared after the death of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And we'll hear from our correspondent in Nigeria as the search continues for scores of missing schoolgirls. This is the BBC World Service.
BBC News with Nick Kelly. A senior official of the South Korean Coast Guard says divers have been able to reach the lower deck of the passenger ferry which sank on Wednesday and glimpse what appeared to be bodies. But the official stressed that visibility was poor and divers were unable to be precise about what they saw. The captain of the ferry and 2 other crew have been detained. Jonathan Head reports from Jindo.
The ship's captain and 2 junior officers have now been placed under arrest. Officials say the captain was not at the helm when the ferry turned sharply and began to list. He's been accused of failing to organise an evacuation of passengers in the 2 hours it took for it to capsize. He said the cold sea temperature and currents deterred him from ordering them to abandon ship.
No sun.
Most of the 268 missing passengers are teenage students from a high school in Seoul who'd been heading for a holiday.
With the international deal reached in Geneva on Thursday to reduce tension in Ukraine already under strain, the American Secretary of State, John Kerry, has telephoned senior Russian and Ukrainian leaders. A State Department official said Mr. Kerry had urged the Russian government to comply fully and immediately with the agreement. Earlier, the American National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, warned of tougher sanctions on Russia if it failed to comply with the deal. David Willis reports from Washington.
The Obama administration's response to the agreement reached in Geneva on Thursday remains guarded. Wait and see if Russia uses its influence to encourage an end to the occupation of some government buildings in the southeast of Ukraine, whilst simultaneously drawing up additional sanctions in case Moscow doesn't play ball. Ambassador Rice said the US had identified close associates of the Russian leadership as potential targets for another round of sanctions.
The chief rabbi of the eastern Ukrainian Donbass region has called on Ukrainian security services to provide protection for Jews in the city of Donetsk. The chief rabbi issued his appeal after men in balaclavas distributed threatening leaflets outside a synagogue. The Education Commissioner for the Nigerian state of Borno has said 14 more schoolgirls have managed to escape from the Islamic extremists who abducted them on Monday night. Will Ross reports from Abuja.
For some of the parents, the anxious wait is over. The Education Commissioner for Borno State said 14 of the teenage girls managed to escape from the Boko Haram Islamists. He said after others had escaped earlier, this meant a total of 44 girls were now safe. He said it was possible that this had happened thanks to pressure from the Nigerian military and volunteers who have been pursuing the Islamist extremists in search of the abducted students. But the official said 85 of the girls are still missing. Some parents have said the real number of missing students is far higher.
World news from the BBC. The United Nations Security Council has expressed its outrage at the attack on a UN base in South Sudan on Thursday, which killed at least 58 people. The UN said the attack on Thursday was unprovoked and carried out by a mob of some 300 armed civilians who forced entry, shooting at those inside. UN peacekeepers returned fire. The spokesman for the UN mission in South Sudan, Joe Contreras, said the peacekeepers' response was in accordance with standard operating procedure.
When a group of people armed with weapons are advancing towards one of our facilities and are refusing to heed clearly stated verbal requests to halt their advance and make known what is their business or present whatever is their grievance, if that mob of armed individuals continues to approach the perimeter of our installations without permission or in standing invitation, then yes.
President Obama has signed into law a bill designed to block Iran's proposed ambassador to the United Nations from entering the United States to take up his post in New York. The White House had already said that the veteran diplomat Hamid Abu Talabi would not be issued with a visa. Mr. Abu Talabi is linked to the siege of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979, though he says he was only an interpreter for the hostage takers. Iran says the US should not prevent a designated UN envoy from fulfilling his duties. And the US State Department has announced another delay in the controversial Keystone XL pipeline project, which is designed to bring oil from Canada to a refinery in Nebraska. The department said US government agencies would be given more time to comment on the proposals. Correspondents said the final decision would probably be postponed until after US midterm elections in November. The Keystone pipeline would be in effect would replace an existing longer section.
Thanks for that, Nick. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC. First to South Korea, where the desperate wait continues for the families of the 268 people, mostly school children, still missing after a passenger ferry capsized earlier this week. In the past few hours came news that the captain of the ferry, Lee Jun-seok, had been arrested. He's apologized to the families and described what happened.
I gave instructions regarding the route, and then I briefly went to the bedroom, and then the sinking happened. At the time, the current was very strong. The temperature of the water was cold, and I thought if people left the ferry without wearing a life jacket, and even if they were, they would drift away and face many difficulties. The rescue
gas
boats had not
works, so we need to
arrived
go
yet,
2 miles
nor were there
away.
any civilian fishing boats or any other boats near at the time.
One important element to come out of that statement is that it appears the captain wasn't at the helm when disaster struck. A point I raised with the BBC's Jonathan Head. He's on the island of Jindo, close to where the ferry went down.
No, that's fairly clear now, and in fact among those arrested with him are 2 junior officers, a helmsman and a young female third officer who we believe might have been at the helm. Now that may not in itself have been the problem, although clearly the authorities are going to have to look at that because that's when the accident occurred. We still don't know, because they haven't got any evidence yet from the ship's hull, whether it struck something, whether that was the reason why it started to list, whether perhaps a very sharp turn was made, whether that was the reason. These are purely the realms of theory. What we do know is that the authorities believe that the captain and these two other officers do have criminal charges to answer in relation to the sinking of the ferry, both neglect of duty and violation of maritime laws. Obviously their cases have to be processed. The captain's defence, of course, makes the point that it was very cold, the sea, and that the currents were very strong. But it took about 2 hours for the ship to go over completely. It was very difficult, and the crew made this point to get people out of the ship at the time. But there doesn't appear to have been an organised evacuation. And of course there's this accusation that the captain left the ship before that evacuation was probably coordinated. It was individual crew members trying to get people out, but a lot of people were told to stay below decks and were then therefore unable to get out when the ship capsized completely. And I think that will be a big focus for the authorities' investigation. Meanwhile, out here at Jindo at the port, they're sending divers out again. They've been out this morning. They've been trying to get into the hull of the ship. They've not been able to. They've seen from the outside of the hull, and they've actually been able to see some bodies, they believe, inside that hull. But the conditions are still very difficult. Visibility very poor, and the currents very strong. And of course, no answers at all for the hundreds of family members who are waiting here at Jindo, where I am, sending out barrages of questions but getting no answers.
Jonathan headed South Korea. A job well done is how the US Secretary of State John Kerry described the agreement reached in Geneva to solve the political crisis in eastern Ukraine. It is clear today that that job is far from over. The problem, the refusal by pro-Russian supporters to leave the government buildings they've been occupying in several cities in the east. They say they won't do so until the government in Kiev steps down. This is the Ukrainian government's response. The words of the Foreign Minister, Andrei Deshitya.
The anti-terrorist operation was put on a hold for the Easter time. We will be not using force against them at this moment. And I know that OEC is ready to start the negotiation process with them if they are willing to leave their buildings.
Well, Donetsk has become a focal point for the anti-Kiev rebellion. The BBC's Daniel Sanford is there.
We've been talking to two groups of people today. First of all, to the leadership of this self-declared People's Republic of Donetsk, and they made it quite clear that they believe that the agreement says that all sides in the conflict should leave all the buildings which they're occupying, and they're including in that the actual Kiev government. They're saying that the Kiev government was brought to power illegally by the protests in the Maidan in Kiev at the beginning of the year, and that the Kiev government should therefore leave parliament. And until that happens, they have no intention of leaving the buildings here in Donetsk. We've also been speaking to the gunmen out in Sloviansk, perhaps the most heavily fortified town in this restless region. And there the gunmen were saying, well, we're not going anywhere until we see that the protesters in Kiev have all gone home. And that, of course, includes the far-right protesters in Kiev, the right sector, who are much detested here in Donetsk.
Daniel Sanford. Colombia is holding 3 days of national mourning for the man its president described as the greatest ever Colombian, the Nobel Prize-winning author Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He died on Thursday, aged 87. Presidents, fellow writers, and his many readers across the world and in Colombia have been paying tribute.
We're feeling a great sadness because he was by far the most representative of our writers. And even though we were sort of expecting it because of his old age and his poor health, it's always a very sad moment when it happens and you find out.
Es una gran pérdida para Colombia porque a pesar de que lleva muchos años fuera de acá.
It is a great loss for Colombia because even though we spent a lot of time living abroad, we always felt that he was very Colombian, a great representative. But he left us his books, fortunately.
Well, that was the mood on the streets of Bogota, but there is great sadness across all of Colombia, as I heard from BBC's Arturo Wallace in the capital.
Oh yes, certainly, and you can feel it pretty much everywhere, although it also has a lot to do with the fact that he passed away during Easter. You know, it's Good Friday, so the streets of Bogota are very empty, very quiet, and it feels like a very fitting tribute to what a writer many Colombians consider all Colombians a national treasure. Although in a way they were sort of prepared for the news because he had been in poor health for a while, and that tempered the reaction.
Just looking online version of the Colombian paper El Tiempo, and the banner headline is Gabo, that's his nickname, Inmortal, Gabriel Marquez, Immortal. What are the country planning to do to remember him?
Well, they have been remembering him ever since the news first break, paying tributes on radio, television, the newspapers, online. They're talking about, like the best way they can do to remember Gabo is actually reading their books again. He died in Mexico and he was cremated there. There will be a public ceremony in Mexico on Monday that will most certainly be attended by Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos.
It was in Colombia. Pope Francis has presided over a traditional religious ceremony for Good Friday, when Christians commemorate the crucifixion and death of Jesus Christ. With his head bowed and eyes often closed, the Pope listened to prayers of people suffering from domestic abuse, prison overcrowding, unemployment, and a number of other issues, as a candlelit procession filed past outside the Colosseum in Rome. David Winnie reports from the Italian capital.
Tens of thousands of pilgrims and Easter visitors, many carrying candles, joined the Pope in prayers commemorating the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Earlier, Pope Francis, who's made caring for the poor a central theme of his pontificate, heard the Vatican's official preacher deliver a powerful homily on the theme of the world's greed for money. Money is behind every evil in our society, Father Raniero Cantalamessa declared. After celebrating an Easter Vigil Mass in St. Peter's Basilica on Saturday night, Pope Francis will deliver his Easter message to the city of Rome and to the world on Sunday morning. It's been announced that Pope Francis has made an unusual choice for his new personal secretary. He's Father Lazi Gaid, a Coptic Catholic priest who speaks fluent Arabic. It's the first time that a cleric from the Eastern Catholic churches has joined the Pope's personal staff. It's a sign of Pope Francis's commitment to closer dialogue with the Arab and the Muslim world.
David Willie in Rome. Nick's back with us with some other stories from our news desk.
Where is it? The Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been re-elected to a fourth term in office. Mr. Bouteflika gained more than 81% of votes cast, and turnout was put at just over 50%. The main opposition leader, Ali Ben Flis, called the election a massive fraud. Opposition leaders in Iran say more than 30 political prisoners have been injured by prison guards who used what they call unprecedented violence to break up disturbances at the Evin jail in Tehran. The violence is reported to have broken out on Thursday during a snap inspection in a part of the prison where inmates have long been angry about living conditions. And the president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has threatened to expel foreign diplomats who defend homosexuality. In a speech to mark his country's independence, Mr. Mugabe deviated from his script to lash out at what he called Europe's homosexual nonsense.
That's actually it.
Thanks, Nick. It is 3:15 GMT with the newsroom on the BBC World Service. In Nigeria, security forces, vigilante groups and family members are continuing the search for scores of missing schoolgirls in the northeastern part of the country. The girls are believed to have been taken in Borno State by the Islamist group Boko Haram on Monday. There's been some good news. The families, more girls have now been found after having escaped from their captors, as I heard from the BBC's Will Ross in the Nigerian capital Abuja.
We've had a statement from an official in Borno State, that's the Commissioner for Education, and he is saying that 14 more of the girls have been found to be safe and sound. They had escaped from the Islamic.
Stone. Should be like a circle thing. it is. So let's see. There you go, 9 feet in the sun. I suppose. That's like really hide it. In there. Mission accomplished.